The dust of Harmony Creek settled on everything, a fine ochre powder that coated the hem of her plain gray cheongsam and clung to her eyelashes. May stood perfectly still on the splintered train platform, a solitary island in a sea of hostile stares. The sun was a merciless hammer in the vast bleached sky, beating down on the tin roof of the station and drawing shimmering heat devils from the iron rails that stretched east and west into an unforgiving horizon. Beside her, the man who was to be her husband, Mr. Abernathy, sputtered with an indignation that made his round face flush a mottled crimson. He gestured at her not as a person, but as a piece of faulty merchandise. His voice, loud and thick with contempt, sliced through the heavy summer air. This is not what was advertised. The letter said a bride. It did not say this. He did not say the word, but his gaze, sweeping over the delicate features of her face, her dark, almond-shaped eyes, and the simple, unfamiliar cut of her dress, spoke it for him. The station master, a weary man with a drooping mustache, merely shrugged. "The contract is void, then. She'll be on the eastbound train at dawn. You'll have to cover the return passage." A murmur rippled through the small crowd of onlookers, a mixture of cruel curiosity and smug satisfaction. May kept her chin high, her hands clasped tightly around the handle of her small, battered suitcase, which held all she owned in the world. Inside her, a cold dread was blooming, but her expression remained a mask of serene composure, a dignity she had learned to wear like armor. Across the dusty track, a man was loading sacks of flour onto a weathered buckboard wagon. He was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with a slow, deliberate economy of motion that suggested a deep and abiding weariness. He did not gawk or whisper like the others. For a moment his work stilled, and his gaze met hers. His eyes were the color of a stormy sky, and in their depths she saw no judgment, only a vast, echoing quiet. Then he turned back to his task, heaving another sack onto the wagon as if the weight of the world were in it. The sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple before sinking below the distant, jagged mountains. The crowd dispersed, their curiosity sated, leaving May alone on the hard wooden bench as the day's oppressive heat began to recede into a cooler, more desolate twilight. The station master reappeared, his boots crunching on the gravel. He set a tin cup of water and a thick slice of dry bread on the bench beside her without a word, an offering of reluctant duty rather than kindness. She inclined her head in thanks, her voice a soft whisper. "Gégé." The foreign syllables hung in the air, and he retreated as if spooked by the sound. She ate slowly, methodically, making the meager meal last, her movements graceful and measured. Each bite was a small act of defiance against the despair that threatened to swallow her whole. She was 18 years old, half a world away from the only home she had ever known, rejected and discarded like a broken tool. The eastbound train at dawn was not a passage home. It was a journey back into the crushing uncertainty from which she had tried to escape. As darkness consumed the last vestiges of light, the prairie came alive with unfamiliar sounds, the chirping of crickets, the distant, mournful howl of a coyote that sent a shiver down her spine. The station lantern cast long, dancing shadows that played tricks on her eyes. The world felt immense and empty, and she had never felt so profoundly alone. She watched the silent rancher, Thomas, finish loading his wagon. He moved in the encroaching gloom with a familiarity born of long practice, securing his load with thick ropes, his powerful hands checking each knot. He was the last person left besides her. When he finally climbed onto the driver's seat, the leather creaked under his weight. For a second he looked toward the bench where she sat, a small gray figure wrapped in shadow. She could not read his expression in the gloom, but she felt his gaze, a brief, assessing silence before he clicked his tongue and the horses started forward, the wagon wheels groaning as they rolled away into the vast, dark emptiness of the land. The chill of the night deepened, seeping through the thin fabric of her dress. May wrapped her arms around herself, the wooden bench hard and unforgiving against her back. Sleep was a distant shore she could not reach. Her mind was a turbulent sea of fear and failure. The station was a skeleton in the moonlight, its windows like vacant eyes staring out into the immense star-dusted blackness. Every rustle in the tall grass, every creak of the building settling, made her heart leap into her throat. She thought of her family, of the promises she had made, of the hope that had carried her across an ocean only to be extinguished on this dusty platform. Sometime in the deepest hour of the night, a soft glow appeared at the edge of her vision. A lantern, its yellow light a small, warm sun in the cold dark, was moving steadily toward her. Her body tensed, her mind racing through every terrible possibility. The light stopped a few feet away, and she saw it was him, the quiet rancher. Thomas stood there, his tall frame cutting a formidable silhouette against the night. He held the lantern aloft, its light carving his face in the plains of shadow and gold, revealing the deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth. He said nothing. He simply walked to the bench, his steps heavy and sure, and placed two items beside her. The first was a thick woolen blanket, folded neatly. The second was a tin cup from which a faint wisp of steam rose, carrying the sweet, comforting scent of warm milk. He set them down gently, his large, calloused hands surprisingly careful. He met her wide, questioning eyes for only a heartbeat before he turned and walked away, his lantern swinging, until he was swallowed once more by the darkness from which he had emerged. May stared at the gifts. The blanket smelled of clean hay and wood smoke, a scent of hearth and home. The milk was a luxury she hadn't tasted in months. This quiet offering, given without a word, without expectation, was the most profound kindness she had ever been shown. Tears she had refused to shed in the face of public humiliation now pricked at her eyes. She slowly drank the warm milk, its heat spreading through her chest, a small antidote to the cold fear inside her. Then she wrapped the heavy blanket around her shoulders, its solid weight a comfort, a shield against the vast and lonely night. The first hint of dawn was a pale gray line in the east when he returned. The whistle of the approaching train was a faint, mournful cry on the wind. May had folded the blanket neatly, placing it on the bench beside her, ready to surrender the small comfort it had provided. She stood as Thomas approached, his form solid and dark against the growing light. He stopped before her, his gaze direct, unwavering. The silence stretched between them, thick with the unspoken weight of her predicament. He finally broke it, his voice low and raspy, as if unused to speaking. "You can't go back." It was not a question or a suggestion. It was a statement of fact, delivered with an unshakable finality. He gestured vaguely toward the vast, empty land behind him. "I need help. At the ranch. A housekeeper." He fumbled with the words, the offer sounding harsh and practical, stripped of all sentiment. "There's a room, food, hard work." The station master had emerged from his office, and a few early rising townsfolk paused to watch the strange scene unfold. Their whispers started up again, sharp and judgmental. A lone woman, and a Chinese woman at that, going off with the reclusive rancher who hadn't spoken more than 10 words to anyone in town for years. The scandal was immediate and delicious to them. May looked from their sneering faces to the man standing before her. She saw the weathered lines on his face, the solitude in his eyes, the calloused strength in his hands. He was not offering her salvation or romance. He was offering her survival, a chance, an existence built on labor, not on charity. It was a harsh proposition, but it was an honest one. She looked at the eastbound track, the path of retreat and shame, and then back at him, the path into an unknown, difficult future. She did not speak. She simply gave a single, deliberate nod. The gesture was small, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. It was an acceptance, a pact made in the quiet moments before sunrise, witnessed only by the waking prairie and the disapproving eyes of a town she would never belong to. Without another word, he picked up her small suitcase and turned toward his wagon. The journey to his ranch was made in a profound silence, broken only by the rhythmic clop of the horse's hooves and the groaning of the wagon wheels over the rutted track. May sat on the hard wooden seat beside Thomas, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. The landscape unrolled before them, a vast tapestry of golden plains, rolling hills dotted with scrubby trees, and a sky so immense it seemed to press down on the earth. It was a beautiful country, but a stern and unforgiving one, much like the man beside her. He never looked at her, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his hands sure on the reins. It was not an unkind silence, but a deep, settled quiet that seemed to be his natural state. After several hours, they arrived. The ranch was nestled in a shallow valley, a simple, unpainted wooden house and a large, sturdy barn, both weathered to a silver gray by years of sun and wind. A lone cottonwood tree stood sentinel by the house, its leaves rustling in the constant breeze. It was a place of profound isolation, a world unto itself. He led her inside. The house was sparse and meticulously clean, but it lacked any touch of softness or comfort. It was the home of someone who did not live so much as simply exist within its walls. He showed her to a small room at the back of the house. It contained a narrow bed with a simple quilt, a small wooden crate for a table, and a single window that looked out onto the endless prairie. "This is yours," he said. He then led her to the kitchen, pointing out the wood-burning stove, the pantry, the pump for the well just outside the door. His instructions were brief, direct. "The work is hard." She understood. This was not a rescue. It was a transaction. Her labor in exchange for shelter. She nodded again, her silent reply. While he went to tend to the horses, she tied back her hair, found a broom, and began to sweep the floor, the familiar rhythmic motion a comfort in this strange new world. Later, while dusting her room, she found a small leather-bound book on the crate. Tucked inside its pages was a single pressed wildflower, its purple petals faded but perfectly preserved. It was a fragile, delicate thing, a remnant of a forgotten tenderness in this harsh, silent house. She closed the book gently, a sudden, piercing understanding of his deep loneliness settling in her heart. Weeks bled into a month, and a quiet rhythm established itself between them. Their lives were parallel lines, running alongside each other but rarely touching. He rose before the sun, his heavy boots on the wooden floor the only alarm she needed. He worked the land with a relentless, punishing intensity, mending fences, tending to his small herd of cattle, his body a testament to endless, solitary labor. She managed the house, her days filled with the scent of baking bread, the steam of laundry, and the quiet satisfaction of bringing order to the stark spaces. In a small, protected patch of earth behind the house, she started a garden, coaxing green shoots from the dry soil. It was her own small piece of the world, a place where life answered her care with vibrant growth. Their communication remained a language of actions. Some mornings she would find a bucket of fresh milk on the porch, or a handful of wild berries left on the kitchen table. In return, she would mend a tear in his shirt, leaving it folded on the back of his chair, or ensure a hot meal was waiting for him, no matter how late he returned from the fields, his body slumped with exhaustion. He ate in silence, but he always cleared his plate. One sweltering afternoon, a buggy rattled up the path to the house. It carried 3 women from town, their faces pinched with self-righteous disapproval. It was Mrs. Abernathy's sister and her friends, come on a mission of moral inspection. They questioned May with sharp, invasive queries, their eyes cataloging every detail of the house, of her. May answered them with quiet, unwavering politeness, refusing to be shamed. Thomas appeared in the doorway, his large frame filling it completely. He had come from the fields, his face streaked with dirt, his presence a silent, thunderous interruption. The women fell silent. He looked at them, his gaze as hard and unyielding as granite. "She belongs here," he said. The 4 words were a wall. They were a declaration. The women, flustered by his unexpected and resolute defense, made their hasty excuses and departed. He did not look at May, but turned and went back to his work. Yet the air in the small house had changed. The space between their parallel lives had narrowed, ever so slightly. The sky began to change in the late afternoon, the brilliant, cloudless blue of summer slowly curdling into a bruised, ominous purple gray at the western horizon. A strange stillness fell over the ranch. The birds fell silent, and the ever-present wind died down to an eerie calm. Thomas had been watching the sky all day, a deep crease of worry between his brows. He'd worked with a frantic urgency, reinforcing the barn door and moving the cattle to the highest point of the pasture. May watched from the kitchen window, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. The storm, when it came, did not arrive gently. It broke with a sudden, shocking violence. A ferocious wind tore at the lone cottonwood tree, and the sky opened up, unleashing a torrent of rain so dense it was like a solid gray curtain erasing the world beyond the porch. Thunder cracked directly overhead, a deafening explosion that shook the very foundations of the small house. Within minutes, the dry creek bed behind the barn was a raging, muddy river, its waters rising with terrifying speed. Through the deluge, May saw Thomas struggling in the yard, fighting to herd a few panicked horses into the relative safety of the barn. One of them, a young stallion, reared in terror, its eyes white. It broke free, crashing through a section of wooden fence. Thomas lunged for its reins, but a heavy support beam, torn loose in the chaos, swung down and struck him. He fell hard, his leg caught beneath the immense weight of the timber. He tried to push it off, his face contorted in pain, but it was no use. He was trapped, helpless, as the churning brown water swirled around his waist, rising higher with every passing second. The world had become a maelstrom of wind, water, and terror, and he was at its mercy. A strangled cry caught in May's throat. The sight of him, so strong and self-sufficient, now pinned and vulnerable, propelled her into action. All fear for her own safety was burned away by a desperate, primal need to help him. She threw open the kitchen door and ran out into the storm. The wind and rain hit her with the force of a physical blow, stealing her breath and plastering her gray dress to her skin. The ground was a treacherous soup of mud and rising water, but she scrambled forward, her eyes fixed on his struggling form. The water was shockingly cold, its current strong enough to threaten her footing. When she reached him, he yelled at her over the roar of the storm, his voice raw with pain and urgency. "Go back! Get to the house, May! Go!" He was trying to protect her, even now. She ignored him. Her gaze fell on a long, sturdy piece of the broken fence post nearby. An idea, born of desperation, sparked in her mind. It could be a lever. She dragged the heavy piece of wood through the churning water, her muscles straining against its weight. She jammed one end of the post under the heavy beam that trapped his leg and pushed the other end deep into the mud for leverage. She threw her entire slight weight against it, gritting her teeth, her arms screaming in protest. The beam didn't move. It was too heavy, the water making everything slick and unmanageable. "It's no use! Save yourself!" he shouted again, his voice weaker now. She took a deep breath, repositioned her grip, and tried again, channeling every ounce of her will, her fear, and her fierce, unspoken gratitude for this man into one monumental effort. The post groaned. The beam shifted, just an inch, but it was enough. He cried out, pulling his leg free from the crushing weight. It was mangled, but it was free. He was free. He could barely stand. Leaning heavily on her small frame, they began the torturous journey back to the house. Each step was a battle against the raging current and the howling wind. She was his crutch, his anchor, her quiet strength, the only thing keeping them both upright. They finally stumbled through the kitchen door and collapsed onto the floor, soaked, shivering, and breathing in ragged gasps. The storm raged outside, a wild beast trying to tear their world apart. But inside the small, warm kitchen, a profound and transformative quiet had fallen. The barriers of custom, of caution, of their unspoken arrangement had been washed away by the flood. May helped him to a chair, her movements gentle but efficient. She carefully cut away the soaked fabric of his trousers to reveal his leg. It was badly bruised and swelling, with a deep, jagged gash just below the knee. She cleaned the wound with water from the kettle, her touch steady and sure, then bound it tightly with clean strips of cloth torn from a bedsheet. Throughout it all he was silent, his eyes never leaving her face. For the first time he was truly seeing her, not as a housekeeper, not as a burden or a charity case, but as the woman who had run into a storm to save his life. Her resilience, her courage, the fierce spirit hidden behind her quiet composure was laid bare. When she finished, their hands brushed, and he did not pull away. He slowly, deliberately covered her small hand with his large, calloused one. The simple touch was electric, a current of unspoken emotion passing between them. "May," he breathed, the sound of her name on his lips, a soft prayer in the storm-lashed room. Later that night, long after the rain had softened to a steady drumming on the roof, he found her standing by the window, gazing out at the moonlit, silvered landscape of their flooded world. He limped toward her, carrying 2 steaming mugs. He handed one to her. It was tea, sweet and hot. He did not retreat to his usual chair across the room. He stood beside her, their shoulders almost touching, and looked out at the water with her. "The ranch," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It wouldn't have survived. I wouldn't have." The seasons turned, the floodwaters receded, leaving behind a layer of rich, dark silt. Under May's patient care, her small garden flourished with a vigor it never had before, its bright green leaves and vibrant blossoms a symbol of the new life taking root at the ranch. The scars on the land healed, and so did the deeper, invisible wounds within the 2 people who called it home. The silence between them was no longer one of distance, but of a deep and comfortable intimacy. They learned the rhythms of each other's hearts, the language of shared glances and small, tender gestures. One day, Thomas returned from a trip to town for supplies. He was carrying a small brown paper parcel. He placed it wordlessly on the kitchen table in front of her. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a bolt of silk fabric, the color of a twilight sky, a deep and luminous blue. It was a world away from the plain, serviceable gray she had worn for so long. It was a question, an offer, a promise. No words were needed. She spent the next several weeks sewing, her needle and thread weaving their future together. She made a new dress, simple in its design, but beautiful in its color and form. On a clear autumn afternoon, a traveling preacher stopped at the ranch. With the vast open sky as their cathedral and the silent golden prairie as their witness, Thomas and May were married. The whispers and judgments of Harmony Creek could not reach them here. They had built their own sanctuary, a world founded not on a cold contract or societal approval, but on the solid bedrock of shared hardship, fierce loyalty, and a love that had grown, quiet and resilient, in the most unforgiving of soils. That evening they stood on the porch, watching the sun set the horizon ablaze. His arm was wrapped securely around her shoulder, and her head rested contentedly against his chest. They had both been lost, rejected by the world in their own ways, but here, together, in the vast, quiet heart of the land, they had finally found their way home. If you were moved by this story of courage and finding love in the most unexpected places, remember that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet resilience that shines the brightest. Thank you for joining us for this journey. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more emotional and inspirational stories, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment. Share in the comments what true strength means to you. We believe that everyone deserves a place to belong, and by sharing these stories, we hope to build a community where every heart feels at home. Until next time, be kind, be brave, and look for the quiet miracles all around you.